Welcome. We are waiting on everyone to join. I just finally got it started. So once people begin to join, we will begin our first discussion of Jane Eyre. We go from chapters 1 to 15. Currently, I am drinking a pina colada out of a mug for some reason. I can handle it. There we go. Anyway, we're going to wait until people join. Looks like Matthew Huff is here.
Am I here?
Hey, what's happening, man?
Can you see my arms? Am I frozen?
No. Hey! Are you drinking a pina colada as well?
Yes.
That's good stuff.
Pina. Dude, I can't believe you're outdoors. How is the sun still out?
Yes, in Rock Hill, we experience daylight for 22 hours of the day.
Oh, you were in Rock Hill, Alaska. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I thought you were right up the road.
No, I've moved.
I brought somebody with me.
It's an uncharacteristically hot day as well.
Janice Eyre.
Jedi Jane.
Jedi Jane, yes. I was wondering at what point she brings out a lightsaber, because this thing, it's not happening.
That's how she cuts her hair. She just.
I didn't even realize that. Subtext, I guess.
Well, you gotta read a little better.
Hey, do you know if Kyle's joining?
I don't know.
Dude, because I would love to hear not only what he spoke on at the conference, but just his thoughts in general.
It's so good. It's so good.
I guess, yeah, you can recap it, right?
Not as good. Not as well as it could. But
So what was this? Bonfire? It looked awesome. It was like you and Kyle and Jordan, a couple other people.
Yeah. When I lived in Louisville, that's what we would do, was go over to Mark's house and just enjoy pipes, talk about whatever. And since I came up, we made sure that we did it again, but this time we were at Kyle's house. So it's kind of my yearly Louisville trip.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Dude, rocking the school shirt.
Yeah, man.
Love it, man.
Right.
All right, you gotta translate the Latin though.
All right.
Is it under God?
Huh?
Our God, under God.
Yep, under.
Our something under God.
No, that's not our. It's flourishing under the will of God.
Under the will of God.
Yes.
Got it.
Get it, Providence.
That's awesome. Yeah. Right on the bustier.
Yeah. Have you seen these?
Come to Providence Christian School.
Yeah.
Dude.
So
it's been a while, man. The bonfire video made me super jealous because I don't know who the other couple was, but just seeing Kyle and Jordan there, just man, it'd be cool to hang out to meet them because I've never even met them in person, but just to hang out under those circumstances.
Yeah. You know, it's my school may not have a lot to offer outside of, just the opportunity to be able to teach in a wonderful place.
Yeah.
Not a lot of like side perks, but that is definitely one that I get to go up to Louisville every summer.
So how was Martin Cawthorn there?
Oh yeah.
Did you hear him again?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, man.
Always.
Yeah, I get that Classical Teacher magazine from Memoria Press, and he's always got an article or two in there, and he's just fantastic. I've used a couple of them in my classes. I know when you were talking about that first when he came to Rock Hill, man, that would have been awesome.
Yeah, he this year he talked about he talked about logos, ethos, and pathos, and just hearing him talk about like showing different presidential candidates in the elections, and
oh, nice,
showing who has done what and how pathos always wins.
Yeah.
And there was no better example of that than this year.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
I mean, the latest election.
Well, even just today with everything that was going on in London, I don't know if you saw that big float of the president that they had.
Oh yeah,
where he was decked out as a baby. I thought that's, I would get, give me high octane yelling rhetoric. Give me that over these quick symbols, quick little, and both sides do it. His red hat has become has a life of its own. But I would almost take the kind of grown men yelling in Parliament, take that over just a single image or a single tweet becoming the headline.
If only it were a single tweet.
Oh well, yeah, yeah. Although at the same time, though, that proves a big point about what you and I do. It's just that image and symbol and those things, those little seemingly trivial pinprick little things are huge. You don't have to have pages and pages of text when one image or one symbol will do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's just proof positive of that. So are you outside your apartment?
No, I'm actually at my parents' house. They because I drove back from Louisville this morning, and my family just came back from Miami, and so my stepmother was going to cook Cuban food, and my brother came into town, which is why we have pina coladas.
Oh, that's really a pina colada.
Yeah, like not even
I thought you were like just sipping a colada.
No, it absolutely is.
For real, I am in a mug. Hey, why not?
And so they're eating, and I was like, "Well, I have to do this." So,
I gotta have a public.
I'm gonna turn on the light. Give me just 1 second.
All right. Cool. You're like, I'm gonna go turn on the light and go inside. never come back. So,
anyway.
Yeah, sorry, Kristen. I've got this video. Colt said he was coming back.
Let me see if I can get a better shot here with it, with that light on.
Yeah,
all right,
it's definitely better lighting.
Yeah. Now,
all
I
right.
think I'm recording currently.
Gracious.
I think so.
Edit down all this dumb stuff.
No, they have to watch all of it, but it is currently. Now I can't find the link. It's 8:50. I think if anybody else is going to join, they can just pop in. But
yeah,
we can at least begin.
Yeah, man. So you said you're teaching this year?
Yes.
What grade level?
10th and 10th and 11th grade. So this is new for me because I haven't taught that age group in literature yet.
Yeah.
I taught them in history last year. And so,
are you familiar with some of the other books that you have to teach them?
I'm teaching A Tale of Two Cities, which I'm going to be reading whenever I'm done with this. Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet, and both of those I have read.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Oh no, it's an awesome year. And so when I went to the conference in Louisville, Kyle was pretty much the only class that I took because he was doing all of the upper school literature, which upper school is pretty much 7th and up, but he didn't teach the middle school portion. He taught all of the high school. But
yeah.
So I was with him the first day where we did like a Jane Eyre book club, which was awesome because he led it just like a book club.
Was it just a round table discussion sort of thing over the book? Yeah. Or he just talked?
Yeah. He had notes. Sorry, Sons of Anarchy here. Coming to join.
Literally, yeah.
But yes, so we did that, and he had notes and guided, the discussion some, and it was great. And then the second day, he began his discussion on Dante, and then did like a sample lesson on Dante the next day. So it was all awesome. Hey, we have somebody else joining the hangout now.
Oh yeah.
What's going on?
Hello, hello.
There we go.
Can I jump on this side?
Yeah. Watch the chorus of the ball.
Yeah, that was what I definitely wasn't.
Computer may be slow, but
Gravity still works.
Yeah.
How's it going, man?
So,
Going.
It's going.
So, yeah. Chris Thurman here, brother.
It's not a dry discussion, right? No.
No, not at all. We're called the Stoutmen.
No, which I guess includes pina coladas now. We got a Miller Lite over there, a black coffee, and then Colt's rocking the pina colada.
He made it, and then he's already down here.
I've actually never had a pina colada. Can you believe it?
Yep.
Especially not from a mug.
Well,
I didn't want to, warm up too quickly, so I put it in the.
There was that. Colt, were you with me when we had the caramel appletini? Was that?
Yeah.
I don't know. That might have been just me. That thing was wretched.
Had you just been watching Scrubs before that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That was the inspiration of it. But I don't even remember what restaurant we were at. But there was just this snot ball of caramel right in the middle of it.
And they give you this little umbrella.
Yeah. I never felt worse in my life. It was bad.
Yes, you have.
Okay, yeah. I've felt worse.
Stories we could tell, though we won't.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. So, as I was saying, Kyle did that, and then we went over Dante, and I don't think I've ever been more excited about reading Dante, which I don't teach this year. I'll teach it next year.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
awesome.
We started.
Was he talking about all three of them, or was he kind of focused on
all three?
On one of them? Man,
is an advocate for teaching all three.
Yeah.
As
in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
He doesn't play around.
Yeah.
Smoking
Black and Mild.
Black and Mild side?
That probably bad.
Yeah. Don't ask questions.
We have a vagabond problem around here.
Just don't worry about it.
Comes out of the bushes. Did you say Jane Eyre?
So existential.
Yeah.
So go through the whole year teaching a book per trimester, and he says teaching that is kind of like teaching the Fellowship of the Ring, and then leaving it at that. Just teaching.
Oh, just doing Inferno, yeah.
Inferno. And so it was great. Yeah. So Jane Eyre, we're doing the first 15 chapters, which goes up to she's just starting to have conversations with Mr. Rochester, right? Just getting to know him, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, how you doing? Good to see you.
Oh, she knows you. Yeah. Oh,
favorite.
Oh, okay.
He's just being kind.
She's just guessed right. Oh, man. But yeah, so there is a lot of stuff that I underlined in here that I just thought was really one thing that I'm doing with my students is just pure beauty of how she writes.
Yeah. That was the first thing I noticed right from the opening chapter is just how clear the writing was and how quickly engaging it was.
Yeah.
And the primary thing that struck me just in this first stretch of reading is how it reminds me of so many different other books of the time, like especially by Dickens. That opening chapter with Jane and John, and that kind of torment, the bullying and the psychological strain and torment of the Reed's house.
Oppression for no reason.
Say again?
I said the constant oppression.
Yeah.
For no reason.
Like Dickens, David Copperfield and Great Expectations both have that element right from the beginning with that first person narrator, the little boy who is oppressed and constantly in fear and alienation and so on. So I thought, I was wondering if Dickens claimed never to have read Jane Eyre, but that's got to be a lie, because that similarity was huge, but also just how she is able to make Jane's personal frustrations so vivid and make her character so engaging, where you just really hate everybody she hates and you want to just justify everything she does. It's just really, really strong writing. I was expecting it to be a lot less readable than it is.
Really?
Yeah.
That's actually, which will kind of lead into something that we could talk about later on, but I'm going to go ahead and do it, is the idea of how whenever Jane finally stands up to Mrs. Reed and the way she handles that, you tend to want to cheer her on and get behind her there and go, yes, you stood up, you did exactly what you should have done. And that's how you feel.
Right.
And then you meet Helen Burns and you're like, crap, that's not how I should have felt.
Well, what do you think? Well, let me ask you that, because when I was reading that, like the first conversation that the two of them have, I think they're by the fire and they're talking about their day, and Jane had been humiliated, and she's talking, I mean, straight out of the Bible too, where Jane's just talking about, I want to hate the people who hate me. And I want to fight the people who are actively fighting me. And she goes through this very, very human response toward a world that constantly battered her and looked down on her and pressed in on her. And then Helen comes out with that, where she says, obviously, the turn the other cheek, forgive your enemies bits of the Sermon on the Mount. But then she goes into this kind of, no matter what happens to you, you constantly always have to think the best of people. And, I think what she says at one point that I questioned was when she says, isn't it better to forget that it happened than to, because she's saying when Jane talks about everything Mrs. Reed had done to her, she says, it seems like you have a really strong memory of everything that you suffered. And she says, wouldn't it be better if you could just forget that had happened and then continue to just, press through and endure and do your Christian duty? And I thought that seems to, I was wondering what you were thinking, because to me it seems like that takes what Christ says and goes into denial or naivety or some kind of rose-colored glasses, don't hold on to anything.
Yeah. Which
I don't know if that made her a little bit too reliant on the wholesomeness of the gospel.
Yeah, and I've had a discussion with other folks. I've been influenced by previous book club, so that may join in. So needless to say, this may not be all my original thought here.
Oh, sure.
The hat is putting too much of a shadow on my face. I think in that sense, when you know what's about to happen to Helen, which I didn't catch this in my reading, and correct me if I'm wrong, the discussion group kind of had it. I don't think I realized that Helen did Helen know she was dying when we first meet her?
There are, I don't know if and just a full disclaimer, I'm only at chapter 9, so I'm like a few chapters behind you. We're just at the point where that's starting to come to be. But I know that there have been moments, when Jane first meets Helen, where her sickness is alluded to, where she's coughing and Jane realizes that she's not well, and Miss Temple seems to be having this very emotional, but where it seems to be evident that Helen's not going to last. Plus, it's kind of, you know, that Edgar Allan Poe gothic atmosphere that she's got, where the pure girl she's not going to survive, you know. So for Helen to be this pure angel that exists in this absolutely oppressive universe, it seems like Bronte is tipping a hat to everything Poe had done before her. And it happens in Little Women. Beth dies in Little Women. She's the most perfect of the March sisters, and she dies, you know. So it seems like the death of the innocent, idealized female is one of those literary trends that she's playing into. So, but I don't know if I would know at this point in the reading whether or not Helen knew herself that she was going to die until the end.
Because I think if Helen does know, then I think that kind of changes how we view what she's saying. Because if you know that you're on the way out, then your mind's going to be, if you have the gospel, there's going to be a peace there that those who do not have that worldview, and not just a worldview, obviously, but just to kind of simplify it there.
Yeah, there's a passage from chapter 6 that talks directly about this, and I don't know what page it would be in for you, but it's right at the end of chapter 6, and it kind of talks about both of these things, where it's right at the end of their conversation about reading the New Testament and imitating Christ, and Jane has a difficult time accepting that. But it's about 3 or 4 paragraphs from the end of chapter 6.
Okay.
She says, the paragraph where it says she has been unkind to you, no doubt. Right about a third of the way down, Helen says, would you not be happier if you tried to forget her severity together with the passionate emotions it excited? Which that was the question I asked. Does that take it too far, trying to forget the painful things that have happened to you? But then she says, life appears to me too short to be spent in nursing animosity or registering wrongs. We are and must be, one and all, burdened with faults in this world, but the time will soon come when, I trust, we shall put them off in putting off our corruptible bodies. So I don't know if that would be a kind of moment where she says, we don't have, life is too short for us to do this, so better to forgive, better to endure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you know, this is very much Paul and Corinthians.
Yeah.
You know. And that's one thing too, is there's not a lot of direct quotation from Paul. So I don't really have a lot of evidence for this, but she does seem to favor the way that Paul speaks sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, very much maybe the evidence is maybe she shares some of the same things that Paul does from the Gospels. Excuse me. Which I guess the Gospels were technically written, I think, after Paul, but still.
Right. Well, it's hard that moment. You know, I'm just with what because you and I talked about how we empathize with Jane straight from chapter 1. I mean, she's an outcast. She's an orphan. She is raised in this universe that is constantly hostile and threatening for no good reason. And then she goes into this moment where she's told to love her enemies, you know. And there's a point too at the end where I forget his name, but the man who runs the school she's at, yes, where he makes a public example of her, and it's very, you know, she wrote this before the Scarlet Letter, but it looks very much like Hester coming out and being pedestalized, and everybody's, look at this poor example, and look what you should not be like, and this sort of shaming culture. And Jane seems to get strength not only from seeing Helen there and seeing her smile and so on, but her strength also comes from a kind of resistance. She's not, I don't think, actively thinking about forgetting their severity or forgiving them, but she's being resistant and enduring with a kind of strength, which might be Bronte's whole point, that having a forgiving outlook provides strength. But even in that moment, though, it sounds like Jane is being sort of like a spine of steel sort of resistance rather than a angelic or pure one. You know what I mean? So I don't know whether I'm supposed to want Jane to be resistant and fierce, or if I should want her to be entirely like Helen, who doesn't survive. Yeah. You know, to be so good that you can't survive this sort of a cold world.
When we think like that, though, I think that, and this is something that Kyle brought up at the book club the other day, was I think the whole book is pointing to something outside of this world. And whenever which Kyle's idea is, the Gothic genre really points to, which when you get later on, which I won't talk about yet since we haven't finished, but I kind of got spoiled on a lot of what was going to happen.
I strangely have not. I know kind of like the bare bones, but yeah. I'm actually thrilled. I'm not sure exactly what happens.
Good. But it's the idea of the Gothic genre. You know, Kyle's big thing that he wanted to get across to his students, you know, us, over the week was the main question your student should be asking is, why did the author do this? Why did the author write that? Why did they do it this way? There's, you know, so very much the you know, authorial intent thing there of everything I need to know about this book and the interpretation comes from reading the text, understanding the text as much as possible, from observing it and then coming up with conclusions.
Yeah.
So he's asking, why the Gothic genre? Because if you notice, anytime there's, and we see this with like when Jane is locked in the red room, no one's allowed in there. No one goes in there because it has that little figure of Mr. Reed, who has passed. And therefore, Jane is in that room and she gets spooked, right? Because she feels there's this spirit in there. But it always comes back to, no, there's nothing supernatural there. And apparently we'll see that some more. I'm not going to say. But the reason that I think that why we should go along with Helen in this side, or why I think Bronte is saying, hey, Helen's not just a character who dies and Jane lives, so therefore we should kind of sympathize more with Jane, is the idea that I think the novel does point to something outside of where we are.
Right.
Earth is suffering. There's things to be had here. There's happiness here, but we're constantly looking for something outside of that. And I think that the fact that she mentions the corruptible bodies, you know, and brings up the resurrection without, you know, necessarily saying that word, you know, it makes it eternity a rest, a mighty home, not a terror and an abyss. This is at the end of chapter 6. And it just seems like you look at Jane, she, number one, never really has a home. There's constant, this Gothic genre has this idea of this terror, you know, all there. If it's not terror from other family members who are oppressing her, or Mr. Brocklehurst, which, by the way, one of my favorite things that from this section is how she gives you a hint that Mr. Brocklehurst is a wolf in sheep's clothing, is the way that she describes him as he shows up at Gatehead.
Yeah.
You know, my, what big teeth you have.
Isn't that great?
That's
He's like this black
great.
pillar of a man, yeah.
Yeah, you know, like you are
Yeah.
exactly setting up what he's going to be, and I was just, I love the subtle humor in this book. It's because it's not a funny book at all. in the sense of she is not writing this with typical comedy. It's not a comedy whatsoever. But some of the, and this is something that I brought up at the book club the other day, is the situations in this book. And knowing some of what's going to happen later on, just the amount of suffering that Jane has already gone through, the catharsis can be humorous at times.
Right.
Where, so kind of like this. It's always raining, right? Always dark. I mean, this is typical English weather, but it's still
it's pretty rough. Yeah,
this rough, weather. And when it finally becomes spring and sunny, Helen dies, and the school has a typhus outbreak.
Yep, bad news.
You can't help but laugh at that.
Right, you can't win.
In the sense where things finally turn around, and then it's like, oh, sweet, it's sunny outside. Everyone's dying. Like you can't help moments of laughter because, are you kidding me?
Right. Well, it brings, one of the questions I have, just anytime you read anything from the Gothic tradition, especially Poe, which she's certainly borrowing from or influenced by, or both, is that, like, two questions. Why is it so compelling? Why do we like reading about ghosts and physical or psychological torment, violence, death? Why do we like that? And then it's like my first question about Jane. How should a Christian accept or not accept the Gothic? Because I don't think you want to be in the camp that outright bans it because it is morbid or whatever. But at the same time, what is it providing that is necessary is an interesting question. Because, that opening chapter, and to your point about catharsis too, in Great Expectations, the opening chapter is kind of similar. Pip is 7, and he is met by a world that is terrifying and threatening and fearful. But at the end of that chapter, he's running home for his life. At the beginning of this chapter, at the beginning of this book, you have that the opening moment is Jane having enough.
Yeah.
Where she says, I've dealt with this long enough, and she fights back. So it's just interesting that the opening moment here is not introducing the reader to Jane's world and then us kind of settling into it. It's introducing us to her world at the moment at which she resists most physically, so it's just there's a kind of strength to Jane against the Gothic world that isn't like Poe, where all the women in Poe's stories are helpless and beautiful and dead, and there's not much strength, there's not much resistant fire or passion in there. But Jane is mentioned as a woman of passion from the jump, which is just a cool twist on the Gothic, where the woman is the one who's actually resisting the storms of brutality and morbidity and so on.
Yeah, I like that. And she's never really mentioned as beautiful.
No, so her fight and her femininity comes from something else.
Yeah. I'm sorry, say that again.
I'm just saying that, so her femininity, what makes her a woman, comes from something that isn't her beauty or her utility as a wife or as a mother or whatever. That there's something in her bones that we are invited to see in chapter 1 when she punches John in the face, and she's cut. He cuts her in the neck, and she's bloodied, but it's not the Helen kind of Gothic where it's this consumptive, pale angel that couldn't survive the world that was too threatening. This is Jane, who is a fighter,
always with her head down, not really wanting to She always looks sullen. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a moment too. Just you were talking about when she goes up to the red room. There's a moment there that I thought was great. It was in chapter 2. About maybe a couple pages in, but it's when she sees herself in the mirror, and which is always just this great so she's reflecting literally on herself. But she says, so she says, returning, I had to cross before the looking glass. My fascinated glance involuntarily explored the depth it revealed. All looked colder and darker in that visionary hollow than in reality, and the strange little figure there, gazing at me, with a white face and arms specking the gloom, and glittering eyes of fear moving where all else was still, had the effect of a real spirit. I thought it like one of the tiny phantoms, half fairy, half imp, and so on. So it's just the way she is describing her reflection. It's super interesting there that she's, I don't know, more spiritual than physical, or she's more connected to the ghostly or the demonic or something otherworldly, like you said.
Yeah.
That was just really great. And it's happening in this red room that is entirely Gothic, where he died all those years ago. And it's where she has that freak out moment. Anyway, so her ability to reflect on her own self with a kind of reality and a kind of unreality, I think is really interesting, that she has a psychological and spiritual encounter with herself in that room that leads to her leaving and going off to school and everything else. So
yeah, interesting.
So why do we read the Gothic? That's why do we like Poe and Bronte and even Emily, like Wuthering Heights is exactly like this, where you have Heathcliff digging up the ground where Catherine's buried so he can lie next to her. It's just there's something about that that's haunting and beautiful for some reason.
Well, that's something that I've always questioned, because I've always been more into the Gothic. It was like, as a high school student, who did I want to read? Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah, and he's really popular for that reason.
Because I love that aspect of this one. I think looking back now at why I loved Edgar, I mean, like I still do.
Yeah. But
Kyle talks about how he loves Edgar Allan Poe for a different reason than he used to.
Okay.
It used to just be ghosts and ghouls and death and all these things, but now he loves it because of what it's saying. And I agree with Kyle in that sense. But I think, to me, it's always been so interesting because, and this was influenced by the trip too, but it's something that I've been thinking about. The Gothic point to the preterite or supernatural. It points to something outside of ourselves.
Yeah, a longing.
Yes, and what is literature? It's always pointing to something out, or good literature is pointing to something outside of ourselves.
Yeah.
And not just ourselves personally. Like when I read short stories or novels, when I first started reading them, which has not been all that long ago, like I'm still fairly new to reading books the way they should be read, or reading novels and poetry and such. It's the idea of wanting to feel that cathartic feeling from somebody else's perspective. When I was in the seminary, I would read short stories just to get into the world and the mindset of somebody else, to understand different perspectives. So in that sense, I'm looking at something outside of me. But also in the sense of, we're looking for something outside of this world.
Right.
Like outside of everything we know.
Right. Which is why we read it all. If we were content to be self-contained, reading would be nonsensical. There's some urge to know something outside of ourselves that draws us to books at all.
Well, it's
not to mention the drive to know God or to know something completely outside of ourselves. Yeah.
It's C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce, where when he's there, he's taking the bus, and the conversation, I don't remember exactly what the conversation is, but it's about, where is the art? And the guide's like, you don't need art.
Yeah.
That's a representation, that's a likeness of something that you get the full experience of here. So you don't need it.
Right.
Dedicating our lives to literature and art in that way is an earthly endeavor. It's not something we're going to need when we're in heaven, because we have the truest reality. We're not looking for something else. We have the glory of God right there with us.
Right. You know what the Gothic does too? I think it's so. Yeah, I agree with you where you say it reminds us of a deep longing that we have for the supernatural, the eternal, the non-human.
Yeah.
And it morphs that into ghosts and whatever else, but it makes us remember that we want there to be something outside of this world and outside of this reality. But I think it also too connects with our deep fear that the things that are worldly and physical don't last, and that's so death, morbidity, and these things that happen that remind us that we are frail and mortal and fragile is another way we are reminded that there's something out there, but we're also reminded that what is here is temporary. Like in Annabelle Lee, that when Poe talks about the guy going into the grave of his lover to sleep with her forever.
Yeah.
That kind of that fixation on keeping the things we love that are physical here forever, kind of substituting that eternal desire and putting it into something temporary, is another one of those compulsions we have to make this physical stuff our everything. And then when we lose it, that shatters our entire worldview, where that brings the sort of psychological torment and an emotional turmoil to, in a very visceral way, that this stuff fades and it decays and it doesn't last.
Well, it's Faulkner's A Rose for...
Yeah. It's just denial, where you refuse to believe that this thing is not here anymore. Whatever it is.
Yeah.
Which Dickens does, not to bring in Great Expectations too many times, but Dickens does it there too with Miss Havisham, where she is living in this eternal present, where she just refuses to acknowledge that the world moves forward, and she allows everything in her house to decay. And I think that Red Room moment for Jane Eyre is that similar, where somehow Mr. Reed and his presence is still there's a refusal to deal with the fact that something has passed, that I think pervades the whole Gothic stream, and that I think is very human, where we have a hard time dealing with the fact that this stuff doesn't last forever.
Yeah. I agree. And it's Jane's looking towards the idea of what's next. Her ignorance as a child, but also, if you notice that whenever Helen Burns is on her deathbed, what does Jane do? Well, Jane loves her. She comes to comfort her.
Yeah.
Jane isn't trying to comfort her with her words. Jane is seeking the answers to the afterlife. Like, and Helen is handling it in stride. You know, like this is Helen's last moment.
Flair, yeah.
And what's happening? There's a girl asking her about the unknown.
Yeah.
And it's just an interesting scene where the last thing Jane says to her is, "How do you know that there's something there? How do you know?" And then the next thing we know, Helen has passed and gone on to that outside of the earthly, material, physical world.
Which is interesting because you hardly ever hear of or think of the Gothic dealing with the future. You know, most of the Gothic elements are things of the distant past, like ghosts of dead people, castles that were once grand but are now in decay. It's a fixation on vampires that can live forever, so that their actual lives are in the distant past, and they happen to still be the past is still looming around us.
Yeah.
That the Gothic, I think, focuses on the past, I guess, in a sense, to try to give us a sense of where humans tend to go for certainty.
Yeah.
Because the future, like you said, is that unknown. It's just constantly, it has its own fear and its own terror, and that we have difficulty accepting. Which is why Jane coming of age at all is a major problem. I mean, any of us coming of age is a problem, because it's constantly being propelled into an existence that you have no clue what it's going to look like or what it will bring. And but Helen, I think you're right. Helen provides, like Jesus does, the antidote for that, which is, you can't determine your future, you can't determine your path, but you can determine how you experience it, as far as Christian forgiveness and endurance and Christian duty and all of that. So, well,
and it points to the idea that, I mean, Helen has an idea of her future, so how she can do it. Very gracious, forgiving way.
Yeah.
Jane does not know, but Jane is still looking towards what she needs to do.
Right. Right.
And then I think very soon after that, not very soon, it's what, 8 years or so after that, where she becomes a teacher, spends more time at the school. She's ready to kind of make her own future. Nobody tells her, "Hey, go ahead, look for a career." And my book actually says at the bottom in a footnote that her idea to put out an ad is revolutionary. I think I don't understand that very well. Why? Maybe because I just don't know the times all that well. But this is definitely a story about the strong female lead who is looking towards the future,
right,
and making her own way. And even though things continue to put her down, she still grows.
Right. But there's a moment in chapter 6, which is that chapter we just keep going back to, and it's a short quote, but it's from Helen, and Jane says, "I don't think I could be able to bear, forgiving people who are oppressive and violent and cruel." And Helen says, "It would be your duty to bear it. It is weak and silly to say you cannot bear what it is your fate to be required to bear."
Yeah.
And I thought that's massive coming from Helen, when she says, of course you can bear it if it's what you're supposed to do. If it's what you're fated to do, is what she says. If it is your fate to bear that, or if it's God's will, however you want to phrase that, Helen seems to say, if it is what your future will be, then of course you can bear it. But Jane, right after that, says, "I could not comprehend this doctrine of endurance." Jane seems to be very reactionary, very impulsive, at least at this point, where, like what you said, she's kind of making her life action by action, where Helen says, no, your life is made by God, and it's your duty, therefore, to endure whatever he brings. And if he brings it, you will be able to endure it, which runs completely contrary to what Jane is seeming to do, where she's making her steps and making her moves one point at a time.
That's interesting with the way that Jane is talking to Helen about how she handles Miss Temple's class, where she says, because Miss Temple has generally something to say which is newer than my own reflections, her language is singularly agreeable to me, and the information she communicates is often just what I wish to gain. And Jane says, well, then with Miss Temple, you are good.
Yeah.
And Helen responds, yes, but in a passive way. I make no effort. I follow as inclination guides me. There is no merit in such goodness.
Yeah.
So it's interesting from what you said. You see that Helen is not about the instantaneous decisions.
Right.
If there is no effort, if there is no planning, no everything has to have that meaning behind it. So yeah, that's an interesting thought.
Well, I think that brings in a whole theological reading here to Jane Eyre, which is, if there is any virtue in us, and it brings in the Calvin perspective too, that everything that you are is entirely of grace. You know, that God has lavished gifts on you. Then what does it mean to be strong, to be independent, to be spirited, to be all the things that Jane is? You know, and while also recognizing that all of that is necessarily passive, because everything we are, we receive, which is where Helen is. That, you know, these are my good qualities, these are my bad qualities, and it's my duty to bear whatever God brings my way, including death. And well, Jane seems to be trying to sharpen herself and trying to maximize her value and her vengeance and all of this, which makes her a very active character. And I'm left wondering, well, which is the right thing to want?
Well, I think, and I cannot, because I've only read it, I've never pronounced it. But what's the German word for what the story is?
Bildungsroman?
Bildungsroman, yes.
Bildungsroman, yeah.
Let me go back to chapter 6. I keep closing my book, and then I just keep going back. So chapter 6.
Never close your book. Never close your book.
I just read it, so give me 1 second. Just this idea. We see, actually, now that I find, going back through, I realized that I had underlined that sentence that you had just given.
About your fate to bear it?
What is it? It talks about, Helen says, and this is after Jane is giving her, like, how do you love somebody who hates you and all that?
Yeah.
You will change your mind, I hope, when you grow older. As yet, you are but a little untaught girl. This is Helen.
Yeah.
Telling this to her.
Yeah.
Helen is on her deathbed, or at least is. We see this young girl who is mature. She is an adult in a lot of ways. And we see Jane as not an adult. We see her at the beginning of her growth, at the beginning of her coming of age. And so that's interesting that Helen, although she is a young girl, her actual age has nothing to do with where she is in life.
Right.
And what's interesting is as she's dying, she's like, Jane's like, I'm so sorry. And she's like, well, I don't have to deal with the suffering that you're going to. Well, she doesn't say that you're going to, but I don't have to deal with the suffering of life, which is, you can make an argument that that's a little bit of foreshadowing for the rest of the book.
She's being removed from this world of pain and misery. Yeah. What's cool is I agree with you 100% about what the character of Helen. Why did Bronte create her? It seems like she is the author's mouthpiece for that angelic, pure wisdom that Jane must hear at this stage in her life.
And just to add one thing, if you notice, to be so young, she speaks so eloquently.
Yeah.
It seems like a master of theology is in your writing. It's not a young girl.
Right. Even the way that Jane approaches her, it's reverent, where it's, she says to Helen, "You speak of these faults that you have, but I don't believe you have any."
Yeah.
She approaches her, and she's in the middle of a book, and she waits patiently until she's finished. It's very much a kind of student-teacher thing. Absolutely. But right after that quote you read, Jane. So Helen says, "You'll change your mind when you grow up." Jane says, "But I feel this. I must dislike those who persist in disliking me." She says, "It's as natural as I should love those who show me affection." And so she's saying, but I feel that my instinct is to be nice to people who are nice to me and to be mean to people who are mean to me. And Helen comes around and says, that's how heathens are. She says, heathens and savage tribes hold that doctrine, but Christians disown it. So she's saying, of course you feel that way. That's human nature. Jane is being calculating, where she says, if people are going to screw me over, I'm going to screw them over. And it's that eye for an eye doctrine. But then Helen comes in with the New Testament and says, yeah, but it's like what Paul says, that's how you once walked. But now you walk in the light, and now you are able to, through the power of the Spirit, be different. And so it's just a cool moment where Jane is that depravity of man, human nature, that kind of gritty side of it, and Helen brings in the new model of grace, where we Christian, because of Christ, we are able to act differently than we feel we should in our heart and in our instinct. This is really cool there.
Oh no, I agree completely. Another aspect of Helen is she says that no one taught her this. And I find that interesting, knowing, like Paul says in Galatians, that no one taught him the gospel. Like he's making a point that, he actually has the apostleship. Christ has appeared to him. He has learned through the Holy Spirit. And I find that interesting too. There's just so many similarities between Paul specifically, but the apostleship in general with Helen being that character here in this story.
Because she's really she's the first one really of that kind. Because Jane has Bessie, kind of. But Helen's really the first one who advocated in any kind of meaningful way for Jane too. So, for Jane's development, that Helen's moment in her life is a kind of, I don't want to say conversion experience, but it is that opportunity where Jane can learn a better way, a more excellent way, because everybody else seems to be all agents of the world, of just greedy and miserable, cruel. But this seems like the first moment in Jane's life where she's offered another worldview, and has it modeled for her.
Yeah, modeled, good.
So what? All right, we're Stoutmen. Why should men read this book?
Why should men read this book? Well,
I know you're going to have male students this year. They're going to say, there's a picture of a chick on here.
Yeah.
Is she hot?
Exactly, yeah.
And then you say, actually, no. Actually, it's really important that she's not.
I before the book club, Kyle and I were talking, and the guy who I brought with me, I think maybe somebody else, but they said, so what is Jane Eyre about? And I said, it's a young woman's exotic journey from Milan to Minsk. So I think that's going to be
That's how you should say it, with a straight face. And all the guys are like, I gotta read this book.
Jane Eyre, right? So,
and that's when they're like, Mr. Guffey, when does it get good? And you go, well, wait till Jane goes up to the red room.
But yeah, I mean, one, just because it's a female going through this means absolutely nothing. That's not what I meant to say. That's not. Just because it's a female going through this.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah.
all the feminist reading of this novel goes up in flames. What?
Just because it's a woman who's going through this, okay? Doesn't mean that it's not a universal story.
This
Right.
is men.
Yeah.
Stoutmen.
So there
Hi,
are
Stoutmen.
there are women among us.
Do you want Cuban coffee?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
I mean, I
You
need
need
to
to eat.
sleep. I do need to eat. We're going to finish up soon.
Okay.
So it's a woman going through this, but it's all universal truth. You know.
Yeah.
You know, we haven't met the Mr. Rochester really until the end of this section, which I've noticed that some editions have volumes and some just it goes straight through.
Mine does.
Yours does have volumes.
Yeah.
Okay. I know a couple of guys in the group. Theirs does not. So anyway, so we just meet him, but so far there's nothing that I couldn't grow from.
For me, the moment of that chapter 6 moment with Helen was the most striking for me, where it just really, it's like in Les Miserables, where you have the law versus grace, where, you know, Jane is appealing to rights. I have every right to hate a world that hated me, you know? It's kind of like the Phantom of the Opera, where, you know, it's like this world disowned me, this world alienated me, so anything I do to act out in violence is justified because of the conditions that they give me. And then for Helen to say, no, it's you show grace all the way down. I thought that was the most universally necessary encouragement. Just how would I respond if I were 10 years old and just brutally treated by everyone? My parents were dead, and, you know, what would I do?
How would I respond as a 32-year-old man?
Yeah, much less. This.
I think that's hard to really swallow as well. For someone to tell you that I'm not supposed to rage against the things that have done me wrong, and hurt me. You know, that I'm supposed to, you know, treat that kindly.
Right.
I don't want to hear that. I don't want to know that. You know,
Right.
don't truly want to do that. I think that's a huge struggle.
I think it. I mean, I didn't grow up in an oppressive home, but I think at 10 it's a little bit easier to hear it than being older. It's still not easy, you know, especially for her because I mean, Mrs. Reed did everything she could. Like, even when she lived at Gateshead, she was torturing Jane, and as soon as she gets out, the first thing Mrs. Reed does is tell Mr. Brocklehurst that she's a terribly bad child.
Yeah.
And so her 10 is a lot different than mine. Yeah. And that's right. I mean, you know, I don't lay awake at night stewing over how I'm going to be gracious to someone the next day. You know what I'm saying? Like, when somebody cuts me off in traffic, I don't go, I'm glad he's going to get where he's going. So it's one of those things where I think someone said in the book club that there's actually a scene in one of the versions of the movies. This is not in the book, where Jane is walking and the spirit of Helen Burns is walking beside her. She doesn't talk. Jane doesn't even notice her, but she's walking beside her. And I think that that's an interesting notion and usage there.
Well, I think, go ahead.
No, it's fine.
Well, just one of the things that makes, I was just thinking about what would, the kind of child psychology that she goes into with the mind of a 10-year-old. The fact that you can confide in somebody. I think she plays up in that chapter how big of a deal it is to be with someone in the midst of a world that is unfair and unjust and so on. So not only is she receiving wisdom from Helen and a new way of living being modeled by Helen's life and her circumstances, but recognizing that there is somebody else in the same boat as me, that you're not alone in that, and that you can. I was just thinking another reason why men should read this, especially in our forum that we have, is that there's something to say about mutual confidence, mutual encouragement. Because when Jane's standing on that stool, the strength she receives is from seeing Helen pass by and smile at her. You know, something subtle like that.
I actually was just about to join in and say that same thing. That's the reason why. Sorry, Chris's dog is up here now, so I'm
gonna knock it over.
Yeah. So the reason I thought, but is that idea of how did Jane hear any of this? It was through a friend.
Yeah.
It was through someone who she could confide in, someone who, even though she's gone and she's not there presently, will stick with her and stay with her.
Which is what a ghost. That's what a ghost is.
Is it? Yeah. Is it just Helen? No, it's what Helen said, but it also is Helen. Like it's the embodiment of what she said.
Right.
It's the ideas behind it. And although we hold to the Holy Spirit giving us the gospel, the Holy Spirit's enlightening us, but in all of that, there's all the truths that I didn't see in Jane Eyre that I've gotten from the book club and then from us discussing it tonight. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, that's very true. And so that's all this whole hour has just been one big commercial for people joining the Stoutmen. So,
absolutely,
all, folks.
Yeah, it just reminds me of what we said about the Gothic too, and just why are we so drawn to it? Is that in a sense there is something about people and words and conversations living beyond them. You know, that Helen, like you said, Helen Burns will always be with Jane in a sense, and therefore is a kind of ghost where who she was and what she provided Jane is never really gone. And same with Charlotte Bronte. You know, here we are reading.
Absolutely, yeah.
She's still talking to us, and so the Gothic idea of a ghost is not so far fetched. All it's saying, it seems, is that what we say and what we do has a value beyond our physical container.
Yep.
And in that way, it's super encouraging, and it makes every single encounter with another human being of eternal importance, because you can change somebody for the rest of their life, even if you are not there to see it. Which is what Helen's whole existence is. And
this happens after Mrs. Reed, who was there for how long?
Yeah.
Part of Jane's life for so long in such an oppressive way. And Helen was only there for a very, very short time.
Right.
And has influenced throughout the rest of the book. I mean, Mrs. Reed has too, but the higher truth of grace and forgiveness sticks with her.
Right. But you have these two experiences with Jane, with Mrs. Reed and with Helen, sort of hovering over her.
Yeah.
With the power of influence and the power of experience in her past, determining the road she will. You know, that coming of age is always us dealing with the ghosts of things that happened and people that came into our lives, and trying to find what is ultimately true and good about those things, and allow them to influence how we go forward. It's fantastic.
Honestly, I think that's a perfect place for us to end.
Dunzo.
There's a lot more to talk about, but we can always add into that in the next one.
Absolutely.
So, and plus I have to eat.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
I'm gonna get rather I'm gonna get rather angry here and need to listen to Helen Burns if I don't need. But yeah, this was great. Thank you for those of you guys who are watching this out after. I hope you guys can join us for the next one. We'll plan the next one. We'll, it'll be in maybe a couple weeks or so, and we'll post it on here. But Matt, it was awesome. So thank you.
Love you, man.
Good to see you, Matt.
Yeah, man.
Good to see you, dude. Go eat some food.
Well, no, everyone else is eating.
Oh, you need to eat some food.
Yeah, they're coming outside like you need. But anyway, all right. Godspeed.
Godspeed.